Every time that song just gets you hype, get ready to learn about some Webflow. What's up, everybody? It's Rymar here. Got Joe in the house. Today, we're going to talk all about the value proposition that Webflow makes, right? Is it worth the money? What are the common objections? What do clients think? How to maybe convince clients that are on the fence about whether or not to use Webflow. We're going to talk all about that today. But before we get too far into this thing, let's effing grow. Okay, what is going on, Joe?
How are you doing?
Ooh,
this is episode number 50.
50.
That's a lot of episodes.
Oh, we still got the little background music. Okay.
It does get me hyped. I like it. We made that switch maybe 10 episodes ago, and it's a nice little song there.
It is, and this we didn't get a chance to kind of commemorate. But January 19th was our 1-year anniversary. So 50 episodes, got some audience and some vibes on this thing here. That's a lot, Yeah. 1 year, 50 episodes. That's almost, all of the weeks in the year. So on our way to 100, if you've been watching, our goal is kind of 100, but and we'll go, obviously beyond that, but like our immediate goal is, can we get to that 100 mark? So let's say what's up to everybody in the comments real quick for hanging with us. We've got somebody, Alexander Graham is in the audience. Let's see, I wanted to go back to this first one he made. Excited for this episode, switched to the Webflow in 2021 and haven't looked back. Been a WP WordPress theme developer since 2007. So he's curious to hear about Webflow limitations and all that. So we will chat. He followed up with, out of the gate, my top client switched from WordPress site. I built a Webflow and saved $500 in license renewals. We're going to talk all about that.
Nice.
That's crazy. So yeah, moving real quick, Babis, Penny, and we're going to run through some stuff today because we've got Webflow, their live streams at 1:00. So we're going to have a hard out on that. What's up, Alexander, Christopher Coleman, Pixelita, Felix is here. What's up, Fernando from Spain? Hola. Fabian is here. Gabriel, what's up? Tim is in the house. Gabriel Dufresne, Carly Harvey. Congrats, episode 50. Time flies. It does. I know. Mustafa's in the house. And that's 50 episodes, but it doesn't count the Learn It Lives one. So Joseph Bates in the house. Richard's here. What is up, everyone? Penny, again. Daniel, Kayla. Hello, everybody. So let's jump right into it. Again, we're talking about the value proposition that Webflow makes. Joe, so any opening thoughts on this?
Well, there's going to be a mix of sales knowledge here. There's going to be a mix of Webflow designer deep dives. We're going to look at what Webflow can do for us, why somebody should come and pay for it. Why should somebody be on Webflow? And that's what this is all about. And by the end of it, you should make the decision, is Webflow worth it?
Nice.
And it's a nice leeway right into that Webflow Q&A.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll be a great, right, that's going to be a good transition. So real quick, if you have not subscribed, we're almost at 10,000 subscribers. I think it's like 9,300 subscribers. 10,000 subscribers is the milestone. So go ahead and leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. We're going to get into a few announcements here that helps us. We'll keep a kind of a count. We'll celebrate that 10,000 subscribers once we hit that milestone too. So all right, let's get into some announcements. We've got a bunch of stuff to fly through. Let's see what the first one is here. Oh, client first template is now live. Joe, you want to chat about that?
Yes, we have client first template number 10 for a church template. And this is going to be a really clean and usable template for any type of business. This one's focused on community. It's all about people connecting, and it's built in client first. This is free from our resources center. You can go ahead and clone this and learn client first. If you're brand new to this and you're just jumping into client first, downloading one of these resources and looking at how it's built is a great way to understand the system and understand how we use the system at Finsweet. So go ahead, finsweet.com/client-first. And right in that resources center, you can find the number 10.
Nice. Okay. Yeah. All right. So moving right along on the announcements world, shout out to Mirela, who is probably tied up. They have a Floxy's event right now. She's teaching about design systems, but shout out to her. Got a W3C certification on web accessibility. She's always chatting and helping folks out with web accessibility stuff. So we wanted to give her a little shout out. Carrying on the client first stuff, Galena is over here, built Matthias Cordis website. So shout out to her. She's doing a lot of freelance work using that client first system. Matthias hired her to redesign his website, which is super cool. And he's got a little thread there that you can check out. But yeah, shout out to folks who are kind of killing it with the client first, making money, doing the freelance thing. Joe, any thoughts there?
Great to see that. Every time I see one of these and people hiring other people with client first as a base, that gets me excited. We have a lot more coming in client first, and these are the kind of tweets that just keep us going and keep us really focusing on building the system. So
yeah,
awesome to see this.
Yeah, and keeping the client first theme alive. Joseph Barry is exploring the fluid responsive. We did a deep dive on that fluid responsive stuff, so shout out to Joseph Barry. Does a lot in the community. His interactions course is super great on the awards website, and his websites are always, they're just so much fun to look at.
Next level.
Yeah, shout out to Joseph Barry for checking that out. Let's see. Oh, last week we did this cool deep dive on sales, and Jay, our head of accounts here, gave us 8 sales tips. So shout out to Big Side Tech, who kind of broke those down. And he's got a link here that starts at those 8 tips. So if you just want to skip through all of it and go through that, and he just breaks down all the tips. So shout out to him on that thread for helping us keep up on that stuff. Yeah. This one is interesting. This is like a Figma to Webflow framework that Edgar Allan always supports our events. They're friends in the community here, so interesting to see people coming out with systems. Again, not necessarily client first-ish, but it'll be interesting to see how they do that, how they see that. So again, community resources coming out everywhere. What's the next one? Upcoming events, community events coming up this week. Joe, Vlad, quarterly update. What do you think? That's coming up right after the show.
Well, I'm excited. We missed the last one, right? There was an issue with the Q4, so it's been a while. I'm excited to see what the community asks, and if they give any more information about some of the things they were talking about at No Code Conf. Do we hear more about logic? Do we hear more about memberships? Some people have tested it, some people haven't. I don't know what to expect, but I will absolutely be there.
And if anybody's watching, if you posted this link to this video in their comments and said, come join us, to the folks that are waiting, we wouldn't hate you for it. So, okay, moving on. Automate all the things. Connor always doing some interesting videos. Auto create any documents with Document. That's Josh Memroud. So check that out. Cool. Yeah, those episodes are always interesting. We do hook Aaron up with the graphics and sponsor his YouTube channel, so always showing some love there. Joe, this will be interesting. Tomorrow we're chatting with the folks from Reloom. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, Reloom has been the largest contributor to the client-first resources. We have a lot of people submitting sites to resources, and Reloom has really gone above and beyond their implementation of client-first. So I'm excited to talk to these people. We've talked to them a little bit, but we're really going to get into this system and talk about how beneficial it is to start with a framework like this when building in client first. So yeah, really, really smart people. I'm excited to have them on tomorrow.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, definitely looking forward to that. So let's see the no code hangout real quick. I'm no good with my left hand. Let's see, we're making new tools in 2020 forecast. So Twitter Spaces, John and Riley, they've been doing these things on Fridays. That's a cool little hangout in the Twitter Spaces world. Another Twitter Space hangout is this Webflow water cooler hosted by Aviv, who's one of our strong community supporters and one of the Webflow meetup hosts. He and Anto. This is at 3 a.m. Eastern time. So this is for the folks on the other side of the world. This is cool to start seeing some community outspringing into those other spaces. So if you're up late watching this one and you'd maybe like to hang out with some Webflow folks in a different time zone, that's the place to go. And I think that makes it, that's all for events and announcements. Joe, we got the first disclaimer. Do you want to just take the disclaimer? We always start the show with the disclaimer for anybody watching. So our disclaimer today is, Joe?
Webflow will not work for everyone. It will not work for every use case. There are a limited amount of use cases where Webflow may be the right fit, and there are use cases where it may not be the right fit. So this is not a one-size-fits-all, and I think that's true for pretty much everything you do on the web. There's no one-size-fits-all.
Yeah.
Webflow has a lot of benefits. There are some downsides. We're going to be talking about this, but also don't be afraid to tell people that Webflow is not the right fit for them. Also, don't be afraid to go over passionate about Webflow and sell your heart out on it. It's really use case specific, but we'll see that it really covers a lot of use cases.
Yeah.
I think there are so many web use cases where Webflow is just the perfect fit.
And there's really only a couple where it's not.
Yeah.
I think that's how we should focus this is like really there's only a couple use cases where this is not the right fit. And so we will jump into that throughout the show here as we go. Audience prompt today is, what is the most common objection you get while selling Webflow to a client? So let us know in the comments here. This is where we'll dive in and let us know your thoughts. There's a poll going right now. Is Webflow worth it? Actually, let's see. People are saying it's totally worth it. It's great, but expensive. Nobody said it's not worth it yet. So we'll see where that ends at the end of the show. But let us know what's the most common objection you get. What do people say? Like when you go to a client or when a client approaches you about web design, obviously we're exclusive Webflow. People come to us because they want Webflow, but some of y'all may be selling other websites or maybe have other toolkits in your arsenal. And so like, what are the objections you get when you start talking to somebody and you're like, oh, we're totally going to use Webflow for this, and they say X? Let us know in the comments if you've had a hard time with any of that, if you get thoughts or prompts from clients. We'd love to know your thoughts there. So yeah, without further ado, let's jump into it. Is Webflow worth it? Joe, take it away.
Okay. Webflow, is it worth it? When we load Webflow, we see the designer tool, and the designer tool is very visual. We don't see the code as we are clicking around on the buttons. And because of this, a lot of people may think negatively about Webflow. They can't see the code. It's like, what's happening with the code? Where does it go? Webflow follows cemented code practices. It has clean CSS practices. When you're applying the CSS to your elements, it's doing it in the proper way. It's really difficult to mess up writing CSS because you can't do that in Webflow. So when I use Webflow, I like to think that I am following a lot of modern web practices. And when you're using other platforms, that may be true, that may not be true. There's a lot of other competitors between Squarespace, Wix, WordPress. You may be in an environment where you're also building visually, but you're not following modern web practices. So that's a big thing for me, right? Forget about the cost, forget about all of these other factors that are behind the website. The website itself is following modern practices. Yeah. That is so important to me. And that's what I get with Webflow.
I agree. And it's one of those things, we've talked about this in that open source debate. We talked a lot about WordPress in the last few episodes. And this is one of those places where, again, they started out as a blogging platform that's evolving into a web builder. And so they've got all these layers and these things that they're trying to rectify now with something called Gutenberg, which is their open source standard for like how you build and design, especially in these new themes inside of WordPress. But they have a lot of technical debt, as we've addressed. And again, not necessarily everything being delivered to those modern web standards. We've seen this, again, even with something like Wix, who positions things with using absolute positioning on a lot of elements, is not necessarily the right way to do things, right? You look at the performance, you look at the code it exports, you're not getting as clean a setup as you're getting with Webflow. The other biggest concern in the same space is data portability in my mind, right? When you're trying to move out of WordPress or something like that to get your data to another place, It's hard to do that, right? You got to do some WordPress export thing. It gives you some XML. You can download your assets and resources, whatever, but unless the place is set up to accept them in that format, it's a little tough, right? Some of these sites have special tools just to migrate your data. Whereas with Webflow, again, you're just exporting to anything you want. You could export a CSV, pull that data into Airtable. There's tools for that kind of thing. We have Noble Airtable. There's other tools in the marketplace that allows you to kind of manipulate this data. And so this goes back to that open source and closed source debate that people were talking about. I'd much rather use a closed source platform that gives me access to my data like that and allows me to pull and push clean semantic data than having to deal with something that's open source but obfuscates the way that the data is stored in a database that only lets me talk to it or touch it in a certain way. Joe, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's an really interesting comment, and it leads me right into maintenance. That when things are managed in a more difficult way, I like to think that the WordPress setup is a little bit more difficult. There's some places where you have more control, but overall more difficult. With Webflow, there is no maintenance needed. That's how I like to think of this. No updating of plugins, no updating of infrastructure. I have sites that I built 6 years ago. I haven't opened up Webflow Designer once, and it's just published. The client doesn't need any changes. It was just a site that did not need any changes. And I can't imagine what would happen with a WordPress site that wasn't touched or open for 6 years. What would happen? What plugins would break? Would there be any security flaws? These things they cost a lot of money. Not having to update your website just to update it for updates.
Yeah. Well, there's a whole ecosystem in the WordPress world built around monthly maintenance. You see a lot of people asking about that model in this space, in the Webflow space. And speaking of, shout out to Webflow in the comments there. Appreciate you. But there's a whole ecosystem built around WordPress maintenance, right? People selling packages of hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars a month sometimes to manage the maintenance of WordPress sites, something that's completely eliminated in this world. Like, we talk all the time about how to add value, and people are like, oh, can I charge for maintenance contracts? Like, you can, but there's not a lot of that maintenance that you have to do. And we talked about in those past episodes that maintenance causes trickle-down effects, right? If, let's say, WordPress updates to a new version and you update WordPress, but your plugins haven't updated to match with that, now you break things and you break your website. That's not possible with Webflow right now, right? It may, like some of the things, like if you're adding custom code or if you're doing something externally, sure. But as far as like Webflow out of the box, like you're never going to have that problem. And that's a big thing in the WordPress world. I remember sometimes getting, you take a staging site and then you do the plugin updates on a staging server to make sure if you wreck anything, you don't break the production site. And so again, the plugin maintenance and all that stuff, it can't be overstated. But it brings us into a conundrum that could be seen as like a pro or a con, right? On the plugin side of things, right? WordPress, the plugins become a vulnerability, becomes maintenance hurdles, etc. But it also allows you to add functionality to your website with a single click. And so that adds, maybe some dollar cost. It adds the functionality. And so that's, a pro and a con there. You don't have the maintenance, but you don't have the ability to, as easily right now, add that kind of one-click functionality. It's something I'm sure they're working on. It's something we talk about all the time. What does that plugin marketplace look in the world of Webflow? Joe, any thoughts on that?
The plugin marketplace. I would love the plugin marketplace. And I think the big benefit of the Webflow plugin marketplace is going to be that it will be closed. That I do not see Webflow opening a plugin marketplace where anybody can submit. There will be a review process. There's got to be a quality control aspect of it. And because of this, I think that it can grow into a very healthy plugin infrastructure. Where on the other hand, WordPress, you may have thousands and thousands and thousands of plugins, but this is not officially managed. You don't know if you're going to add something to your site that's going to break it or has security vulnerabilities. This is really important. And it comes down to worrying more about your website. I like to worry less. I think everybody likes to worry less. And we're living in a world where we want to worry less about things, not worry more about things.
Yeah.
And I think Webflow brings a lot of that, especially in this maintenance and plugin conversation.
Yeah, 100,000%.
Yeah.
And stepping beyond that, the next step is performance, right? I worked with WordPress for a long time, long time. I used different themes. I paid for extra hosting. I paid for like caching layers and blah, blah, whatever. And I could never get a website to load under like 2, maybe 3 seconds, you know? And with Webflow, we see it all the time. People bang, 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 millisecond page load speeds. They're showing their performance and accessibility scores and their lighthouse metrics, and everything's 100, 100, 100, green, 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 right? And
Yeah.
you compare different sites. And now, again, I'm talking about most just basic sites, right? I'm not talking about a Joseph Barry special or a Joe Moore design special with thousands of interactions and beautiful things and whatever's, right? Like that's a different world. I'm talking about most production pages, your typical web page, not like your fancy over the top landing page. Performance is just not even like comparable, right? Joe, any thoughts on performance? It's just night and
Yeah,
day.
it is. It is. It's really up to you how performant your site can be. Do you want to add a whole bunch of interactions? Do you want to add giant images? If the answer to that is no, then you kind of have a performance site out of the box.
Right.
It's really your own doing to make your site not non-performant.
Yeah.
Now, on WordPress, on the other hand, you can make a very performant WordPress site. It's possible, but it's also very difficult. And it requires a very advanced level of knowledge and probably a lot of customizations on your own instead of relying on third-party tools.
Yeah.
A lot of people in the WordPress world have to rely on these third-party tools. And because of this, it is just not as efficient.
Yeah.
There's no way for it to be as efficient.
Couple caveats. I do think Webflow will hit some of those same limitations once they open up that plugin marketplace, that people will then be relying on functionality for third-party things. So I don't necessarily see that as like a big issue. As it relates to performance, though, you can get a WordPress site to be super performant. You just install the default theme, and don't add anything else to the site. Like literally just blog on the default theme, and then you can get it to load lightning fast. That would be like the WordPress response, like, oh, well, if you use it out of the box with this thing, it's like super fast. Okay, sure, whatever. Start adding your theme builder. Start adding your, like Elementor. Start adding your Aveda or Divi or whatever theme you want to use. Start adding all those other layers, and then see if you can still get that same performance you get with just a blank, clean, factory default, whatever 2021 theme you're using in WordPress. It would be interesting. I'd like to know this in the comments. Joe and I talked the other day about maybe doing an episode where we just open up WordPress and build a little site or try to get a site install. I still have a WordPress server that we could like do this, so we could set it up real easy. Maybe we could do the same thing with like Squarespace and Wix. So let us know in the comments if you think that's something that would be helpful. The last thing in this little segment before we move into the objections, and actually before we move into the objections, I think we do Q&A. But the last thing that Webflow gives us that WordPress doesn't is this complete design freedom.
Oh, yeah.
I was working on a little prototype the other day for some developers, and I was getting nuance and like nesting the divs and creating these little like just like you're writing front end code visually, and it's like one of those experiences that I never had with WordPress. Even when I was building with some of those elegant theme builder things, you never got the nuance of being able to like, oh, let's not do this way. Let's put those in a row and tighten up the margins here and really, make everything fit perfectly. And that's the thing people miss about Webflow. They think it's just another Squarespace or Wix tool or whatever. They don't understand it's no. This is code visually. Like this is me writing front end code in a visual framework, right? It's not like anything else. Joe, last thoughts there before I see the comments on fire, before we jump into the comments here for a bit.
Yeah. Bring up some comments. I'll finish up this design freedom may be intimidating for some people. That just the idea of being able to design a whole website is a scary thought for a non-designer, for someone that just wants to focus on the development. This is where I see the Webflow template marketplace coming into play. This is where I see tools like Reloom Library coming into play, where you can start with Reloom Library, get your whole wireframe in there, and just throw some colors in there. And this can, this can not turn non-designers into designers, but give people a really strong starting point without having to download a whole theme builder inside WordPress.
Yeah.
So complete design freedom, a good thing, a bad thing, but overall, that's on the pro list.
Yeah, it's definitely a pro for the folks that are looking for that, who don't want to get into the code, which is a lot of people. There's a lot of people in the design world who are tired of like handing off their designs to some abstracted development team and then trying to talk them through how that should respond and how those interactions should work and how things should play, without like learning the code from the ground up. And so that for sure becomes just a wide open box. But what you said, Joe, about it being a con is that, like, I remember the first time I got into Webflow and I started creating elements and then realized that I have to refine that nuance down to all the breakpoints. It's like, okay, I like starting from the ground floor with a blank canvas, but one of the things that like a WordPress theme does is like it handles some of those things that you don't have to, like all the responsive and all the little things that, so that was one thing to get used to. And I could see that's very intimidating if you're not familiar with that, or if you're used to kind of having your hand held and just kind of adding the content into elements and letting the system or the theme style everything, where that can be intimidating. And so complete freedom is not always, the right thing. So let's jump into some of these comments here. Yeah, let's do that. Let's go into Caesar saying, imagine you could build React like you build Webflow. Not saying, just saying. Keep your eyes peeled. That's all we'll say about that. Webflow from a design standpoint is unbeatable. The designer is the best thing ever invented.
Nice.
Yeah, let's see. WKD, I think it would make my eyes bleed to see you build in WordPress. Live build comparison between WP, Webflow, et cetera would be awesome. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Why is there such a low amount of Webflow developer jobs? I don't think in general, if you look at like the total market share of like WordPress number of websites versus Webflow, it's just not there yet. Just give this time. But there's a ton of jobs out there. I don't know that there's a shortage of people looking for Webflow developers.
And there is an extreme growth in this area that 3, 4, 5 years ago, you would have never seen Webflow developer in a job title. Now, it's pretty common. If you do a job search for no-code tools, you're going to find Webflow in there. So this is big growth, and I think you're going to see more and more of these jobs popping up in the very near future.
Yeah. Let's see. This is in response to Alexander here, but he's saying, I'm seeing articles about WordPress security breaches, hacks almost daily, and that scares the bejesus out of me. Yeah. Let's see if we can find what that was a response to, because Alexander, if we remember, was our WordPress. Let's see, getting 99% on Google Lighthouse on all my pages, even in the galleries, huge selling point, performance.
Wow.
Tons. You seen anything in here we should address? There's so many. There's one, Richard saying. Do you want to read that one, Joe?
Yep. I'm a design by heart and always had an interesting code, but Webflow has allowed me to design and build my vision, the full package for my business. That's great. It's allowing people to actually launch their business. That's a big reason why people can't start a business, because getting the web presence out there is just too much. It costs too much, or there's too big of a learning curve. And we're seeing more and more people like Richard who are saying, hey, this idea that I had in my head, now it's a business because I got to build it in Webflow.
Yeah, and this is the superpower we talk about all the time. If you're a person who's been beating your head up against this wall, this code wall, where you're just like, and maybe you're proficient with Squarespace or WordPress or one of these other tools like I was, right? It's super proficient. I could build, I was making good money selling WordPress sites, but I always felt handcuffed, right? To take that next step, to get to the next level, to be able to like really build these things that as soon as I found Webflow and that power was unlocked inside of me, I was like, oh, this is the thing. So I could see what Richard's saying here, where it's like, yes, this is a superpower for sure. Let's see, Alan. Webflow is great, but as a CMS, it has some basic things missing. The ability to publish and unpublish a page rather than publishing the whole site is crazy. Joe, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, there are some limitations when it comes to publishing your site, unpublishing, permissions, control of certain pages versus global pages. Absolutely, Alan. We're going to get to some of these limitations later in the episode, but there, to every good, there has to be some kind of bad somewhere. So we recognize those.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's a good place to, WKD saying if you really need that e-commerce dashboard stuff, go Shopify, so the Webflow can work. Um, Complex e-commerce is one place that Webflow just falls a little bit short right now. I know it's
Yeah.
something that's coming. Same thing with like membership and login sites and portals, that kind of thing, because they just don't have that native solution yet. There's a lot of cool solutions around the edges for that, but we're not going to dive into the pros and cons of any of those for timing purposes. But yeah, those are the places where like I really think like on those bigger sites, with membership stuff baked in, like it's going to be hard to move somebody from WordPress to a Webflow in that instance. But that's a for now kind of thing, right? A lot of these limitations are yes, but, right? Yes, but they're working on them. Yes, and this is coming later. And so I think, again, we're really early on all this stuff. Everybody who's watching this, there's 86 folks on the stream right now. Everybody who's watching this, we are on the cutting edge of all the stuff that's coming in this no-code/visual development space. And so we're looking around like, why isn't this the norm? Well, it's because you're at the front of the pack, right? Mm-hmm. And so soon, as you look behind you, it's going to be lots and lots more people behind you. Lots more jobs, lots more products, lots more services, all those things. All of these limitations will kind of be removed.
And think about it. There was probably a time in WordPress where people were thinking, why can't I build marketing pages with this? Why can I only build blog pages? And that seems like a ridiculous statement, but that was because you were part of WordPress so early, and people just weren't making marketing pages. It was really just a blogging platform. So just like now with Webflow, why aren't you building e-commerce? It's not there yet. There will be a point where we look back and say, well, now all my e-commerce is on Webflow.
Yeah. Lisa's saying, I'm such a WordPress veteran. My brain is synced to all the tech debt hacks and relating to how easy Webflow is. My brain doesn't grok the egrok of the easy. So, nice. Yeah, it's when you're used to always having to go in and update a plugin or update the version of WordPress and make sure that works with all your plugins, or add a new thing and make sure that doesn't crash the site, or whatever you're doing, right? These are all things that you just get used to when it's how you do it, right? There's a lot of things in Webflow that we're just like, oh, you got to do that with attributes, or you got to do that with so-and-so, Like we just know that, right? And these are things that people come to Webflow and they're like, oh, you can't do that. And you're like, well, we know how to fix it, right? And so if you're in the WordPress world and you're just like, oh, this is how I do things, well, you don't really see these new solutions, and you're not really, it's hard to like learn something from scratch, right? That's this complicated. Right. And Webflow is only going to get more and more complicated as you grow, right? There's going to be more complexity as you can add membership, and as you can add logic, and as you can do all these other things, as you start adding attributes, and as you start adding other like whatever things that come in, right? It's going to get more and more technically difficult. And so that's hard when you're on that path to switch, right? And so what we're seeing right now is that it's still reasonable for most people who've been working with WordPress to keep working with WordPress, right? They can still do things easily. It's how things are done on the web, right? But that's slowly changing. We've talked about that in a number of ways, and it will continue to change. And so as that goes, people will more and more like have Lisa's perspective here, where they'll be making this switch and not really understanding how, what they're going to do with all that free time. So here's a quick question, Joe, follow up from Lisa here saying, what tech stack or languages would be best for devs to understand to get the most out of Webflow? Anything on the most advanced and beyond JavaScript?
We at Finsweet are using TypeScript and Svelte. These are our two choices for our stack. And we will, that's how we work in Webflow with applications. So that would be my answer to that.
Yeah.
I know there are other people that do other things that try to integrate React and Vue. We don't do that exactly. So yeah, that's Lisa, if you have a follow-up for that, let me know.
Nothing other than saying free time. Penny saying it took a while to get over being able to look at the code and understand how it worked, but I've gotten better with Webflow and appreciate not needing to. But you still have to troubleshoot. Like there's some things the other day I'm in there and I'm playing and I'm getting a weird behavior, right? And it was like a Z-index thing, and it was like a child Z-index thing on another element that I had to still account for. And so you're still kind of having to do the troubleshooting thing. And just because you don't need to go through the code or the CSS or the HTML or whatever to look at it doesn't mean that you don't still need to understand that. So I kind of understand what Penny's saying there, but I also think like, you still like troubleshooting is not super easy in Webflow sometimes, especially when you get into some complex layouts or some really dense pages. Maria, 84 of 39 likes. Come on, people. There you go. Come on. You smack them into shape, Maria. We appreciate that. Let's see. Any other questions that you're seeing before we jump into the next thing? Because the next segment is going to be all the different objections and how to overcome them.
Yes, I'm sharing the Svelte link in the chat. Some people asked what it was. WKD.
Here's a good question before we move forward, Joe, if you want to take this one.
From Avi, how do you think someone like me can sell as a Webflow developer who is not so great as a designer, but a great UI developer, visual developer? Avi, absolutely, you are very welcome in this no-code world. There are a lot of people looking for Webflow development. We at Finsweet do not offer design services for our clients, and we have an entire agency business built completely around development. So you can do it. There's a lot of options for you, even without design.
Yeah. 100%. And the other thing we talk about all the time is finding partnerships, right? Finding the right partnership or finding the right person to connect with that maybe they do design, you do development, or maybe they do development, you do design, like whatever the relationship needs to be, sales and you deliver, like all these things can be beneficial. Don't be scared to find someone to work with. And, you don't have to build a company. You don't have to start an LLC right off the bat. You can start just working on little projects and figuring out how to like share the load. And then as that relationship formalizes, you can decide whether to take the next step or whatever. We have tons of episodes on that. Alexander, we're going to keep picking on Alexander because he's our coming from Webflow or WordPress person. Hang on, why is it not updating my comment here on the screen? Let's try this. Oh, it's not updating my comments. I don't know what's happening. Okay, sorry. He's saying, Lisa, firm grasp on CSS, post CSS, and writing semantic HTML with Flex Grid are critical, doing less for more, making sure you don't have unnecessary containers or divs. So going back to your question about what languages to learn, just having a firm understanding of that. Let's jump into the objections here. Let's jump into what holds people back from using Webflow. And again, share in the comments here. I think maybe some of y'all shared. Those are buried now way in the back, and for some reason my comments are not updating on the screen. I'm going to see if I can fix that real quick. Joe, talk a little bit about objections. We've got 5 formal objections here. We're going to do a little price dive. Again, we've got about 23 minutes before we jump off. We're going to do a hard stop today because Webflow's right after us with Vlad. So Joe, thoughts on common objections, et cetera, things like that?
Common objections, the biggest ones we hear are pricing and technical limitations. And there are a few others, but I would say those are the top ones. People saying Webflow is more expensive than other solutions. It's more expensive than Squarespace or Wix or WordPress. And yes, there is a possibility that your Webflow monthly bill will be higher than WordPress, than Wix and Squarespace. But it also comes with all of the benefits that we just talked about, all of the things that you have to worry less about. So is the extra $4, $10 per month worth that? I like to pay for subscriptions and things that make my life easier.
Yeah.
And I really like to think that cost in Webflow is worth it. In a business sense, in a personal sense, as a developer, that is a big objection. Is it too expensive? Reimar, what do you think? Do you agree with this?
I don't know if it's too expensive. I do want to look here, though. Let's take a look at some pricing pages from some like what we would call, key competitors here. If you look at Squarespace, $12 to $40, for commerce. Okay, so that's kind of a baseline. If we go to Wix, we see the same kind of thing, $14 to $39. If you add some of the business and e-commerce plans, you get up to $50. And if you get to enterprise, you can go a little higher. And you can look specifically at how they're comparing those plans. And then I wanted to bring in a WordPress competitor here because that's kind of another common, comparison that people make. WP Engine is a top tier WordPress host. So you can see $20 a month. This is like a single site. If you get into e-commerce or if you want multiple sites, and then based on traffic, you can get into, some higher tier pricing here. And it just depends, again, based on traffic and size and all the different things. And then Webflow, which, again, I think they're in the middle of updating some of this prices, moving to like workspace pricing. But their pricing comes in that, let's see, regular, same thing, 12 to 36 bucks for regular hosting. If you get into the e-commerce, you're looking at 29 or 74 bucks for most things. If you get into some of the advanced stuff, you're into the 200 bucks range. And then you also need this account plan. And this is where, people kind of throw a hurdle up. They're like, oh, and I got to pay for hosting and the account plan or whatever it is, And so like, this is, so I don't know, right? When you take into the account all the maintenance hassles that you don't have, because this WP engine pricing, maybe it's, 30 bucks a month, 50 bucks a month, whatever it is. But now you have to add in all your plugins. You have to add in all the time for maintenance. So is that worth 50 bucks a month? Is that worth 100 bucks a month? I don't know how much that maintenance stuff is worth. It seems to me like it's worth quite a bit, right? And so, and again, with Squarespace and Wix, I think those are like lower tier things. They don't give us the same flexibility. I think they're targeting a different type of user. We could talk about the comparison between these platforms and WordPress, but if you look at their pricing, it's not that far off based on what you get. And again, with the performance, with all the other things, I'm not sure in my mind Webflow's pricing is expensive. I do think there's one place where I wish they had a little bit more, and Ezekiel mentioned it, like an agency tier or like
multi-site.
Yeah, like packages. A multi-site package, right? That's because sometimes I want like 20 URLs, but they're just a single page that like redirects to another place. I don't want to have to pay full hosting for that. Like that's the place where I wish like I could pay, for like an extra URL for a page or something like that, like some kind of thing. I don't know, Joe, any thoughts there?
Yeah, the pricing is similar. And even though you may be paying more for Webflow, the end bill for everything Webflow is more money. If you value your time, it's not a lot. How much is an hour of your time? If you value your time at $5 an hour, then maybe you do want to go the WordPress route because you can work for many hours and it's a very small amount of money. But if you have value for your time, which everybody listening should, Webflow makes a lot of sense because it's going to save you hours per month. Even if it's 1 hour per month, I'd like to think that that's going to be the difference of these hosting packages. It's not that much money. So that's a great way to look at it. Do you value your time?
Yeah.
And saving hours, that's a lot of time. You could do a lot of things in a few hours per month.
Yeah, and Lisa's saying there, WordPress is time expensive. So maybe you save a little bucks here.
The most expensive.
That's the most. And it's the most frustrating in that moment where you do break something and then you got to go find your dev and make sure that they're available. You got some blue screen of death or some like white screen, I think is what it is in Webflow, where like you get locked out of your back end or not Webflow, WordPress. And so, those are the moments where you're just like, eh. And Alex is saying here, Kinsta for WP is $30, which is the best WP hosting. So there you go, $30.
There you go.
Like,
nice.
Let's see. I'm not sure I would put Squarespace and Wix in the same conversation as Webflow. Those are like entry-level website builders. Webflow is a full business solution. I agree with you, Luke.
Yeah.
But if you look at their pricing, it's fairly similar until you get into the top tiers, until you start getting into some of the advanced stuff. But I still think it's fairly close, right? Shopify would be another one, a good one to pull up here, actually. Shopify pricing.
And I'd like to think that Webflow can also be an entry-level website builder. We can do a lot with Webflow. There's a lot of things you can do inside Webflow Designer. And if you download a template, you change some colors, you change the text, this can be seen as an entry-level website builder.
Yeah.
So I would like to put it in the same category as Squarespace and Wix. Just say we can also do all these other things with Webflow that's not possible with Squarespace and Wix.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is so I have the Shopify pricing up on the board here, and it prompted something in my head because I think Webflow with their pricing, if you look at their like e-commerce pricing, this advance is like $212, and I think they're charging a lot for their e-commerce, and I think we addressed this the other day. It's that like it's going to be hard for them as they add features to keep nickel and diming raising the price. I think they probably, I'm hoping, they shot out kind of a big price here so that they don't have to, as they go, keep constantly updating and adding, like it'll seem like nickel and diming. So I'm sure in their mind, their goal is to get competitive with Shopify as an e-commerce platform. I don't know how long it takes them to get there. I'm assuming that as you look at Shopify's pricing here, that will be reflected in what their pricing is. It'll be close to that. And so I don't want to go too much further on pricing because I think we're going to do a full episode on pricing here in the near future. But yeah, so let's go on to the next common objection. Objection number 2 here, Joe.
That's technical limitations, things that are just not possible in Webflow or should not be built in Webflow. I like to think that anything is possible in Webflow with the right technical knowledge. However, a lot of things should not be built in Webflow. And these shortcomings can really prevent people from using the platform. Things like native authentication or next level authentication, very secure authentication that handles private data. This type of stuff right now is not really recommended on Webflow unless you have an all-star developer that knows their stuff. So this is a big shortcoming. Some people need user systems, and Webflow is not really set up for that now. That goes with gated content as well, gating content, adding complex e-commerce. We talked about that just before. These kind of shortcomings, if you have a site that has complex e-commerce or a site that's based in memberships, maybe your thought is, I should not be on Webflow. And that's okay. That's part of these objections and part of why somebody may not want to be on the platform.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And there's there's lots of tools for different folks, different strokes for different folks. Webflow is not going to be a one-size-fits-all solutions for everyone. And so this is one of those things where, we talk about knowing the limitations so that you don't find yourself in these problems where you go and sell somebody a site. You learn this Webflow thing, you learn there's membership stuff, and you're like, oh, look, I can totally do this. And then you go overcommit to a client and you find yourself not being able to actually deliver the goods. So yeah, there are those instances. And again, we talked about that complex e-commerce and membership stuff. Don't try to force all these things into Webflow. Webflow will evolve. Keep Webflow in mind and use it for the specific use cases that it makes sense for. If you're making your business around this, then shape your business to attract those type of clients, right? If you find yourself running into these technical limitations a lot, it's probably because you're advertising a service that, is not fit for the type of, tools you're learning. Right? So if you're learning Webflow, you shouldn't be out selling full stack software. That's not what you're doing, right? That's a different solution. You may need to go a bubble route, or you may need to learn some code or a builder HQ kind of thing, right? And so just that all comes into play. The type of people you attract, the type of stories you're telling about your business. We talk about this all the time in the world of sales, right? All of these things lead to the type of leads you get, and the type of objections you get have to do with the type of leads you're generating. So if you're running into the same objections over and over and over, it may not be that it's a Webflow problem. It may be that you're attracting the wrong type of person, and that may be something you need to start introspectively looking at and figuring out, how do I get the person that wants to use Webflow, or that Webflow becomes an easy sale for? Because selling Webflow should not be difficult. Selling Webflow is not something that should really create a lot of stress for you to make money or sell websites. Any thoughts there, Joe?
Yeah, there are companies that will fall under these limitations, and these are clear limitations that we just laid out. But most marketing sites do not need these features. Most marketing sites, most companies do not need complex e-commerce. Most companies do not need membership systems on their front end, and they don't need, they just don't need these things. So Webflow really does work for most marketing use cases. So to reiterate what Reimar said, if you keep finding people that need complex e-commerce, that need membership, and it's continuously a no for Webflow, you're just reaching the wrong people. Because there are thousands and thousands and thousands of companies, millions of companies that are perfect for Webflow, whether they know it or not, because they don't have these requirements for the limitations. So just don't work in that area. It's easy.
And this is, again, one of those places where your portfolio will do the scrubbing for you. Your portfolio is what attracts people to you, right? And so they see something that you've done before, and they're like, I want you to do some of that for me. And so, in that context, the sites that you're building and the type of work that you're showing is really what should be attracting that work. So if you're running into these issues, like, again, I'm not sure how you're doing your sales or how you're bringing people in, but I would encourage you to look elsewhere. If the technical limitations become a hurdle to you selling Webflow, you're probably selling to the wrong people. That's where I would challenge folks to look at their process. Another common objection is the steep learning curve, right? There's a significant learning curve to Webflow versus some other tool, and this can be intimidating. We talked about having to style everything from scratch. We talked about there's no theme that handles all your global stuff, right? That you can't just replace the style guide and that matriculates all the way through. You got to handle the CSS. You got to understand how do these things work, right? And so you got to understand CSS positioning and grid and flexbox, et cetera. And so these things all become things that you need to understand, which can become difficult, right? If a client doesn't want to learn that, if their team is working in WordPress, right? If you have a group that's working in WordPress and they've got a big monstrosity of a website, maybe they have 10 people that understand how to work in WordPress and only one person understands Webflow. That could be a hard objection to overcome, right? Because now they can only have one person working on the site versus the 10 other people who know. Any thoughts on that objection, Joe?
There is absolutely a learning curve. It's evident. For some people, it's much smaller. For some people, it may require some weeks or maybe even a few months to really get the hang of. Depends on your past experience. It depends on what you know in the past. But even if you're a super pro, even if you're coming a top web developer, there is a bit of a learning curve because things are just done differently in Webflow. There's a lot of processes that you wouldn't do in traditional development. And they're not necessarily wrong. They're not bad practices, but they're just different. So until you know the platform, until you've actually built several sites, you don't really understand what those are.
Yeah.
And that is a learning curve.
Nice.
But it's a small learning curve relative to a lot of other platforms, relative to learning something like a WordPress. It's a steep learning curve, but I think relative to others, it is a good learning curve.
Yeah.
And you're probably learning good practices in the process of learning Webflow.
Yeah, that's where I would say I'm not sure it's easier or less steep, but you're actually learning things that translate to the front end of the web, right? You're actually learning skills that help you. Like when you learn the technical complexity of WordPress or some theme editor or whatever, you're just learning that tool. When you learn the technical complexity of Webflow, you're actually learning how the web works, right? You're learning front-end code, you're learning HTML, you're learning CSS, you're learning how these things work. You're maybe not, again, learning how to write them semantically. That's what you're paying for, is that translation layer. But visually, you're having to learn all of these things, and that's a career trajectory growth thing. That's something that's useful in a lot of different ways. And you'll start learning that the more you learn Webflow, the more technically adept you'll become. The more you'll start understanding other code processes and other things that are happening on the web, especially as you push it further with JavaScript.
I'd love to reach out to Alexander Graham, who's been really active this episode, comes in as a WordPress developer for many years, template developer. Alexander Graham, is there something that you have learned from using Webflow? Is there a new piece of web technology that's been unlocked just from jumping into this tool? If there is, I'd love to hear it. If there's not, tell us that there's not.
Yeah.
But that's going to be an interesting one because it really does open you to a lot of different things that you're just not aware of in that WordPress infrastructure.
Yeah. And let's get through these last two, and then we can just shoot the shit a little bit until we have to jump off here. But common Webflow objections is that it's hard to collaborate in Webflow, which obviously we're seeing them work on. They recently announced collaboration updates. Maybe it's not perfect. The handoff process, we'd like to work on the same page like you do in like a Figma or Miro or something like that. But maybe that's coming. They're taking steps towards that collaborative functionality. And so I don't know that this is a real objection anymore. WordPress has similar limitations where you can have multiple collaborators in a WordPress site, but they can't be on the same page. Wix has introduced some collaborative features that are very Figma-ish, and so that's one place where people are saying, "Oh, well, Wix is better for collaboration." Okay, sure, but again, you don't have the same flexibility and freedom. I think Webflow will eventually catch up to some of that. I don't know if they'll have full feature parity in that regard, but we'll see how that evolves. But this is another common Webflow objection. Joe, any thoughts on how overcoming that, or do you think that's a real objection?
It can be an objection, but we're not seeing people avoid the platform because of it. Some clients may come back and say, hey, I have a problem with this because we worked in this way. But it's not a strong enough objection to turn the platform away. So because of that, it's not a very serious objection for me. It's something that Webflow can work on, but yeah, I'm not seeing people leave the platform because of it.
Yeah, agreed. And there's a bunch of comments here. Let's get through this last objection here, and then we'll jump into the comments. Security and privacy concerns. Again, this is one of those that I don't think there's any real concerns here, specifically because at the moment, Webflow is serving out a flat file, right? It's serving out a static website. There's not like, you can't log in, you can't access like server functions through a Webflow website. So there's not a lot of security. There may be security vulnerabilities if you're sharing your Webflow password or account access, whatever, but that's no different than if you're sharing a Webflow password or a Webflow plugin password or whatever else. And so you actually hear about WordPress security breaches all the time. You hear about these massive plugins that vulnerabilities that affected millions of sites or whatever. I think, again, like Android and iOS, you'll see Webflow be a little bit more secure in that because they'll be a little tighter as to who can access those plugins and who can kind of create some of those things. And so I don't know that security or privacy is a real concern. There are some concerns over GDPR as it relates to not having local servers, especially in Europe. Those are significant concerns where people are like, oh, we can't do this. But there are workarounds for some of that unless you're being super, super strict about GDPR. Which again, I don't know, right? That comes down to a whole other episode. We did a full deep dive on GDPR and California CCPA compliance on that stuff. So if you're interested, look at the archive on some of that. But Joe, any thoughts on that last one before we jump into the any final comments here?
I agree there. Let's jump into the comments, and I'll start it up with Alexander Graham, part 1 answer to what he's learned just from using Webflow, coming from the WordPress world. Less a feature, more of a thinking process. Performance is king for Google's Core Web Vitals update. I made absolutely sure to use SVGs and correctly size, compress JPEGs and PNGs. So that is a whole new way of thinking in performance, uploading a photo to Webflow and getting that little tag, very large caution. It's there. We see the size of the images. We're aware of it. If your website has any slow loading, you know it's probably because of an image. Like we talked about in the beginning, Webflow's fast by default. You're making it slow by adding things on top of it. So that's what Alexander is saying here. And getting to number 2, knowing when to convert PNG to JPG and compress them is key. On gallery pages, I'm getting 99% page speed score. Lazy load everything below the fold. Keep nesting to a minimum. And then the last thing from him, P3, as for new technology, as an uptight hand coder my whole career, Webflow's advancements remove the need for me to stress about clean, semantic, and accessible code. That is great. Alexander, thank you for sharing that. These are a lot of the things we talked about in the beginning of the episode. All these benefits, the performance benefits, the semantic benefits. That's great to hear. Neil, Reimar, you want to take this one?
Yeah, and this is a series as well. He's saying a UK-based agency currently hosting 70-plus WordPress sites on Flywheel. Last 5 builds have been on Webflow, and all new projects will be on Webflow or Shopify for e-commerce kind of moving forward. Saying that Webflow costs a bit more, so this is still Neil, than bulk WordPress hosting, but no time on plugin updates allows us to build out more new projects with Webflow, so that probably turns into a net positive. And then saying shout out to client first and attributes to helping them make that move. So for sure.
Cool.
There's a part 4 from Graham here.
Okay, we have Alexander Graham saving big money with no licensing for WordPress plugins and hosting. Nice. My designs have changed in advance because of a lack of limitations inside WordPress. Freedom, man, these UI elements, I cannot read the bottom of that comment. Freedom was implemented. Yeah. I got it. Nice. I like that ending.
Yeah. Okay. So let's jump in here and see if there's anything else. Just one thing I knew when I launched back in 2012. Yeah. let's see. I need to make use of Zapier to save my Webflow form data to CMS. Sure. When you feel like WP, it feels like you guys are speaking to page builders, which are limiting, but WordPress can actually be more customized in Webflow, building your own theme, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Andres, I understand this, but we are in the no-code world. And so to do those things, you need to understand code. You need to be able to build with code.
A lot of it.
And so this is inaccessible for most of the people in our audience. So yes, when we talk about this, we're making that comparison to people who work with theme editors and page builders, because that's typically who's making the jump into Webflow. If you can build and customize themes and code from scratch, you're probably not dealing with a lot of these issues because you can have that flexibility. So yeah, I that's a good point. Not sure that's changes anything as far as we're concerned here.
Yeah, agreed. And we talked about that before. You can build a highly performant WordPress site, but that requires deep knowledge of the platform.
Alan saying, my ongoing stress with Webflow is their approach to GDPR. The cookie banner on their site isn't even compliant. So, yeah, again, these are all early things. I don't think Webflow ever thought they were going to be, the backbone for websites globally for so many people when they first started. I mean, maybe they had these ambitions in the back of their head, but the way they structure the software, they didn't expect that to scale to the rate it has. And I think this will all come as they fix. They're working on this stuff. I would expect that to be one of those, and coming kind of thing, So,
we're coming up on 12 o'clock.
Yeah, I was going to say with that, we've got Nelson starting the live stream over here. So let's go ahead and we'll call it quits on our end, and we'll say thanks to everybody for hanging with us. We appreciate, we appreciate everyone. We'll let y'all go to that next stream. So thanks again, and we'll catch you over in the comments of the YouTube or the Webflow stream. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay. We're out.